Okay, shall we open with a word of prayer? Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity we have to go back over to review the words of pioneers. For you were showing them truths for their time, and these are the same truths that we need for our time. Guide us today, help us so that as we study, we may keep in mind that it is to you that we owe our allegiance, for it is from you that all blessings come. Direct us now. Help us to study. Guide us in all that you would have us to do, so that we may be prepared to give the message that you would have given in this earth, in the time of this earth's history. For this, Father, we thank you. In this, we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay. Now, I have looked at this not so much as a study, but as a conversation. Now, before we get into the document itself, I'm going to open one other item very quickly. Can you see that on the screen?
Yeah, if you just hit that little arrow and get rid of that stuff on the right. So you got that
Bar there.
just halfway down that bar, there's that little arrow. Click on that. You're almost there above that gray bar. There's a little arrow pointing to the right.
Yeah.
No, you have to click on, no. If you go halfway up your page on the right, because right next to the word document language US.
Okay. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm just,
Yeah, there's that, it's just that bar it's a little bit to the right, like about, I don't know, a couple
okay.
inches.
The one
Not
that
that
talks
one.
about,
Not
Yeah.
that one. Go to the next bar, the next gray bar going down. Halfway down. Nope. Go down. Nope. Halfway down that light gray bar, there's that little arrow. Click that.
like that.
Yeah, and then you can zoom out a bit, and then you can get more of it on the page. Well, I guess you can center that, but okay.
Does that work okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this diagram, I'm very grateful to Brother Stephen for this, because he's pointed out the fact that when we're looking at the years of 158 BC and 161 BC, that we're able to see that even though there's a disagreement in the date between Father Miller and Uriah Smith, that these 2 years are actually giving us a very specific example for us at this time. Now, as you can see here, of course, we have 158 BC being 2021 years to 1863, and 158 years after 1863 brings us to 2021. We do the same thing with 161, where the 161, 2021 years brings us to 1860.
Mhm.
And then we have the 161 years from 1860 also to 2021. Now, this is going to be the basis for this conversation today. Going back to the document. Now, we have several passages that we're going to go over quickly, and these were passages that were written and published in the year 1833. In the second chapter of Daniel, beginning with the 31st verse and ending with the 45th, we have a prophecy of the 4 kingdoms which would arise in the world from that same time until the end of all earthly kingdoms. The prophecy was revealed first to Nebuchadnezzar, afterwards to Daniel in a dream, together with the interpretation thereof. It was presented by an image whose brightness too excellent and the form thereof terrible. The head of the image was of fine gold, representing, as Daniel has explained in the 38th verse, the Chaldean kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar. The breast and the arms of silver denoted the Mede and the Persian kingdom, which began in Cyrus after the destruction of the Babylonian kingdom and was composed of two lines of kings, first the Medes, afterwards the Persians, very fitly represented by the breast and the arms. This kingdom began about 536 years before Christ and ended in 336, lasting about 200 years. Belly and thighs of brass, representing the Grecian monarchy, which began to fulfill this prophecy under Alexander the Conqueror, 336 years before Christ, and lasted about 178 years, including the four kingdoms into which Alexander's was divided at his death, and finally subdued by the Romans about 158 years before Christ, which last kingdom is properly and fitly represented by the legs and feet of the image, partly iron and partly clay. Now, I think we're agreed that the legs are a good representation of papal Rome,
Yeah,
and the feet, part iron and part miry clay, are a good representation of papal Rome.
yeah. Now, just one point there. Some commentators try to say, well, since the last kingdom, the Roman kingdom, is a two-phase kingdom, that is, it's both pagan and papal Rome, some people try to argue that the two legs are pagan and papal Rome, but I don't think that's a good argument. Now, we know the arms represent Medo-Persia, which is a two-horned kingdom, right? It's two
Right.
powers. But there is other explanations for Rome in its sort of two phases, both being, how did they put that? Because I've seen this in some old commentators. I can't remember the word they use, but basically you have Rome has two different characteristics because it becomes a empire, right, with an emperor, a dictatorship, but it's also a republic.
Right.
So, or some people would even put it that it's republicanism and democratic. So there's different ideas that people try to use, but all I know is that it refers to pagan Rome, not to papal Rome, the legs.
And in that, I'm in full agreement,
Yeah,
because the legs themselves, especially during pagan Rome, were known as being a great military power.
yeah,
With the situation with the feet, partially iron and partially miry clay, I think is a better representation of papal Rome, because it does not have the military power that the pagan Rome had.
yeah.
He saw until a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, which were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. Daniel 2:34 and 35. The reader will readily perceive that the kingdoms of this world must be totally and utterly destroyed when this prophecy is fulfilled. Do we have any disagreement with that?
Well, see, they look at the stones hitting the image as the second coming. And that's generally how we would understand it.
So we would not disagree.
Yeah, there are other options though.
Okay.
That is, we could say that the stones smote the image on October 22nd, 1844.
But were the kingdoms then destroyed at that time?
No. So it's just the way that you would look at that is you would say that the prophecy comes to October 22nd, 1844, which starts the Day of Atonement. And it just puts that all as one event. So from October 22nd, 1844, it brings us all to this event of the destruction of these kingdoms all the way to the end of the world. It just doesn't have the detail. So that's one of the other ways that people look at it. Because the stone smiting the image is the judgment. And that began October 22nd, 1844. But I don't know which is the right way. I sort of lean that way that I said, but definitely it is about the destruction of the worldly kingdoms at the end. That's the ultimate goal of it.
So as Miller continued, for all that is like the gold, the silver, the brass, the iron, and the clay must be swept away together. Now, I find this interesting because when I copied this, it does not say clay, it says the day
Yeah.
must be swept away together.
Yeah, it's a typo.
And that the kingdom of Christ, represented by the stone cut out of the mountain without hands, will fill the whole earth. Now here Miller goes on. He addresses the figure of the four great beasts from Daniel 7. Here again, addressing that these are coming up from the sea or out of peoples, and they are diverse from one from another. The first was like a lion that had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So here is Miller addressing this portion of Daniel where Daniel is again calling the lion an it.
Mm-hmm.
So this civil government was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man.
Mm-hmm.
This verse alludes clearly to the Chaldean kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar, the lion denoting the power and great authority, the eagle's wings, the exaltation and glory being plucked, showing Nebuchadnezzar that his exaltation and glory would depart from him for a season and be taught that he was no more than a man. For after suffering the want of his reason for a little time, he would have a man's heart restored to him and learn that the Most High ruled. This is the head of gold. Now, I jumped a little bit as I prepared for this. I went from paragraph 7 down to paragraph 22. Because the ultimate portion of this is going to deal with this fourth kingdom. So, evidenced from sacred history, paragraph 22.3, there shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of his kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Octavius, afterward called Augustus Caesar, who was nephew to Julius Caesar, did stand up in his estate, that is, successor to Julius Caesar, a raiser of taxes. This was the Caesar that was emperor over the Romans when Christ was born, and that taxed Jerusalem. He died in his bed, neither in anger nor in battle. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, Tiberius Caesar, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Now, in the past, we've had what Elder Jeff had been using as an example here. I believe as a vile person that he was placing Bill Clinton.
No, the vile person.
Yeah.
No, he was putting. No, he was putting Tiberius as Trump.
Okay.
That's how he had it. Because yeah, how are they laid out? Because what he does is he looks at the time of the end, and you then have I just have to bring up my chart here. It's closed. Yeah, because you have he lines up Tiberius with Trump. Now, how does, because he puts Bill Clinton as the one who is the tax. No, wait, hang on. How does he line this up? I'm trying to remember. Stephen, do you remember?
Yeah, Obama was the tax.
Yeah, Obama's the tax guy. That's it. So that's going to be Octavius or Augustus,
Augustus.
right?
And
Julius
so-
Caesar, Bush,
I had-
and then Pompey would be Clinton, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
But Pompey was part of the triumvirate with Octavius.
yeah. So what Jeff had was, okay, Julius, Octavius, Tiberius. No, that's a different line. I don't think I have it in my charts. I would have to look at it somewhere else. But I'm pretty sure he put Tiberius as the one, that the vile person, as Trump. So that would put Obama as Augustus. And then it would put George Bush as Julius.
See, part of the issue that I'm asking,
Yeah,
Trump was being seen as being such a vile person.
yeah.
He didn't come in to become president by flattery.
Well, yeah, we would try to say the flattery was by deceit. See, that's part of the problem. All I'm saying is what Jeff did.
I know.
So now, so when we go back and we look at this, because we haven't actually really addressed this since that I can think of,
Right.
since July 18th. Because the way that we looked at lining up Persia with the presidents, we were dealing with basically 7 of them, right?
Right.
You know, like, so trying to deal with, I don't know, I've never really felt comfortable with how Jeff did it, but I haven't really looked at it since. So there's, I have looked at how Odilio addressed it. And there's something there we need to look at. But so you're going to put Tiberius with Clinton?
I'm, well, I guess the ultimate that I'm looking at is whether or not Tiberius is more in line with Biden.
Well, Tiberius in line with Biden. I don't know. I'd have to think about this. It seemed to me we were inconsistent on how we dealt with Rome.
Agreed.
So I'd have to look at it again, the whole way in which we dealt with this. Because one is we don't really have a time of the end in the Roman Empire, and we need to have something that marks the time of the end.
Well, here's,
And normally what we would do is we would take the line of Christ. And so that's going to be under Augustus, but maybe there's something that we're not seeing.
Augustus was when Christ was born. I believe we would find that Tiberius is when Christ's ministry was on the earth.
Yeah.
So the whole point of this conversation is to revisit a lot of this, but there are some points that I have looked at that I would really appreciate input, and we're going to get to those points in a few minutes.
Okay.
So, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, Tiberius Caesar, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. The above is a true description of the character of Tiberius Caesar. He is noted in history as being a vile person, of obtaining the kingdom by flattery and deceit, also of dividing the land of Judea into factions and petty provinces, and under whose reign Christ was crucified, here called the Prince of the Covenant, which ends the 70 weeks of years and establishes the vision of Daniel to be true, because so much of said vision as relates to the 70 weeks had been fulfilled.
Mhm.
Right now, the literal promised land is not being so much divided by Rome, but the figurative promised land of today is very much in factions.
Yeah.
Therefore, I look at this situation to apply Tiberius as Biden. But it's only an opinion, and I'm more than willing to be corrected.
Yeah, well, I think we'd have to look at a lot more points. Now, one of the things that Odilio brought up had to do with Claudius and Nero, of course, with the burning of Rome on July 18th, which would put Nero in our time period, followed by Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. So you're going to have all those things dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, finally under Vespasian. So, if we're going to do that, we have to have a lot more reasons of how we're structuring it, either as a repeat of history with these kings, or something, right? I understand what you're saying, but I think there has to be more than that.
Okay.
Right. So, but it's something we need to look into, definitely.
Okay, now as Father Miller continued, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. The reader will now observe that the angel Gabriel, after carrying the prophet Daniel down to the crucifixion of Christ and the end of the 70 weeks, goes back and begins the history of the Roman government, when and at the time the same became the fourth kingdom in the world. This will be evident first because it speaks of a league made with him, when he was small, or Republican people. Now, this is not speaking of a party, it's speaking of the form of government.
Mhm. So
And
wouldn't we then try to line up the beginning of Rome with the beginning of the United States?
it's a good point. And we're going to come to another point like that here in a few minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Secondly, this league must mean the first league made between the Romans and the Jews. For I never could be able to find any kingdom prophesied of in the scriptures until the kingdom became connected in some manner with the people of God. Thirdly, as the angel has been describing individuals rather than kingdoms, as the wars of Pompey, the fall of Caesar, the raising of taxes, and the peaceful death of Octavius, the vile character and deceit of Tiberius, and crucifixion of Jesus Christ under him. So now he has gone back to the league made 150 years before Christ to bring up the national character. This league the reader will find an account of in 1 Maccabees 8 and 9 chapters, also in Josephus's Antiquities. This league took effect when the Bacchides, the Grecian general, left Jerusalem by the command of the Romans and returned no more to trouble the Jews, as Melanius tells us, 1 Maccabees 9, 72 to 73. Thus the Grecians, or Daniel's third kingdom, ceased its power over the Jews, and the fourth, or Roman, it was spelled Rome, R-O-M. So it's their mistake, as I showed.
Yeah.
Kingdom began when they were republicans or a small people. The Romans did agree that the Jews might enjoy their own laws, government, and religion. He shall work deceitfully. Now, when I look at this situation, I see a couple of examples. First, Obama, when he introduced his healthcare plan,
Mhm.
it was under this that you can keep your own doctor. We have no problem with this. That right there was a lie.
Hmm.
They chose to work deceitfully.
Mhm.
Yet within 100 years, they were deprived of their laws, the appointment of their kings, and their government was reduced to a Roman province. How signally hath God visited the disobedience of the Jews for making this league, which God had commanded them never to make with any nation round about them. By suffering this fourth kingdom, which was described as having great iron teeth, to break them in pieces and finally scatter them among all nations as a lasting monument of God's displeasure against disobedience. By this league made 158 years before Christ, the Roman kingdom became connected with the people of God and worked deceitfully. Soon obtained the power to trample on, to break in pieces, and to devour the Jews. Therefore, I believe we shall be warranted in fixing the rise of the fourth kingdom on this period, which is the apocalyptic beast with 7 heads and 10 horns of time, to wit, 158 years before the birth of Christ, the history of which, together with the rise and fall of Antichrist, will be the subject of our next chapter. So my first question: do you have an issue with this statement from Evidence of Sacred History 22.6? And I'm leaving the bold portions up for
Mhm.
consideration. Do you have an issue with anything that's been said here?
Well, I don't have an issue. I just know that Uriah Smith uses 161. But the idea here is that they definitely did make a league 3 years later, but it really doesn't go into effect until they need it, which is 158.
Okay, but here's what I'm looking at. And here again, I'm willing to be corrected. Father Miller makes the comment that this league occurred 158 years before the birth of Christ.
Yeah.
Do we agree with that?
Well, we don't agree that the birth of Christ is in December of 1 BC, which it seems that's where Father Miller puts it.
I would almost think that Father Miller was placing it as the birth in 1 AD.
No, he was putting it at the end of 1 BC,
Okay,
right at the very end, because there is no, well, okay. Yes, in a sense, he would be putting it in 0, because he's not taking into account that there's no 0 year. So he's not being very specific. He's just taking that 1 AD is the first year of Christ, that Christ basically is 1, because he seems to accept the December 25th birth of Christ. And that would put it in 1 BC based on how old he has Christ at the different dates, having him being 33 and a half years old in the fall of AD 33.
okay. What I'm getting at, I think we've all addressed this from our understanding of the calendars, that Christ would have been born somewhere around 4 BC.
Yeah, so he was born in September of 4 BC, September 30th, around there, somewhere around there.
So we're looking at this, the league being made in 158, and I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah,
I'm just disagreeing that it was 158 years before the birth of Christ, because to be completely direct, it would have been about 154 years before the birth of Christ.
yeah, though often people use that, even Ellen White does, just that the birth of Christ is, even though she doesn't mean it, because it is BC, which means before Christ. So that's how often people just use it in sort of a colloquial sense. They're not trying to be as specific. But he believes that the birth of Christ is like 1 AD, basically.
Okay.
Or if you do take the birth of Christ as 4 BC, and if you go back 158 inclusive years, it would take you to 161 BC.
Yeah, that's
Agreed.
true. But still, where Miller is placing it, he's basing it on the chronology that's in Josephus and Maccabees.
Right.
When I looked at that, I found that the Baccharies, when he did move from Israel, I believe that was the correct date, was 158 BC. But the league seemed to be 3 years prior. It seemed to be when the league had some practical effect, and the references from Maccabees and Josephus, I think, were correct as well, applying to 158.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but the league itself seemed to be 161.
yeah, but Miller seems to count the league as related to Baccharies. He's not going back to 161 and taking that as the league, which Uriah Smith is.
Yes.
So he's using 158 correctly. It's just that he's calling that the league because that's when it practically comes into effect.
Okay.
right? So that was the problem that people were having, is they didn't really understand Miller's view. And they would just say, well, he disagrees with Smith, but he doesn't disagree with the chronology. He just disagrees with what event marks the league. And Miller seems to know about the league in 161. He knows that it was 3 years before, but he's not counting that.
Okay, now, I didn't write this question out, but as we're addressing this, as we're talking about this, I'm going to return to a specific sentence that's on the screen. How signally hath God visited the disobedience of the Jews for making this league, which God had commanded them never to make with any nation round about them, by suffering this fourth kingdom, which was described as having great iron teeth, to break them in pieces, and to finally scatter them among all nations as a lasting monument of God's displeasure against obedience.
Disobedience, yeah.
Against disobedience, yes, excuse me. So does this command of God given to the Jews have weight upon us today? Is this something we are to obey?
Yeah. It's always been a problem with Adventism, though. They did that with the educational system. They did it with the medical system. So we have a situation, it's probably similar in the US, but in Alberta, our schools have to teach, anything that the Alberta government tells them they have to teach, because they receive money from the Alberta government. And so that means they have to promote LGBTQ and whatever else the government wants them to promote.
I think we're finding that in the Adventist colleges throughout America.
Yeah. But these are just even in elementary schools.
Right.
So I mean, the church never should have been in that position. The other thing that I've always had a problem with the church is, and I don't take advantage of it, but getting a tax write-off for donations. I don't receive a tax write-off whenever I donate it to the church, because I don't think that the church should get that break from the state, so to speak. Because it puts the church in a position, in order to receive that nonprofit status, it compromises in order to retain that. So it'd be better to be nonprofit, or to be profit, a for-profit business, or some other way. But the law doesn't really give us another option. But the church could have created another option.
So are we in agreement that this applies to us as much as it applies to the Jews?
Yeah.
Okay. The history of the fourth kingdom, which we are now entering upon, is divided into two parts, represented by the legs and the feet of the image, the 10 horns and the little horn, the great red dragon and the woman, the pagan and papal, the daily sacrifice abomination, and the abomination that maketh desolate. I found it interesting that this is the way that Miller phrased this, because he's showing that these abominations are so very interrelated.
Mhm.
The first of these, Rome pagan, or the daily sacrifice abomination, the angel Gabriel now goes on to explain to Daniel, and after showing when this kingdom begins, we are heretofore explained, Daniel 11:24. He then gives us a short prophetic history down to the time when pagan Rome should be taken away to make room for papal Rome. We will now follow the angel Gabriel, Daniel 11:24. He shall enter peacefully upon the fattest places of the province. He shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. In this verse, the character of the Roman kingdom is even, that he would enter into the most populous places, take the spoil and the prey, and scatter them among the more dependent parts of the Roman government. Did not Rome bring such riches out of Asia and scatter them through the Western Empire? Which luxuries finally proved her ruin, even for a time. This, I suppose, is the time pagan Rome was to exist, which I shall hereafter show is 666 years. See Revelation 13:18.
Mhm. So when you count from 158 BC to 538, and actually I think he's going here to 508. Pardon me.
He's going to 508.
Yeah. I mean, it's 166 years if you count it inclusively. Or 666 years if you count it inclusively.
Right.
Right. So, and even though we say, well, you know, he didn't take into account there was no 0 year, I still think he's correct with this 666 years. And I've been able to show 2 other periods of 666 years, one going from 129 to 538, and the other one going from 597 to 70 AD. So now when he says it's even for a time, now we take that time as 360 years. Is he saying it's 660 years?
He's placing it as 666 years.
Okay. Which I don't think I would take for a time as being 666 years, but I do believe that 666 years does apply to pagan Rome,
Okay.
from the league to the taking away of the daily.
Okay, Daniel 11:25. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred to battle with a very great army, great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. This verse is a description of the wars between Rome and Egypt in the days of Pompey and the Caesars, which was noticed in the last chapter, this description being national. So we have more to consider here, because Trump, while he stood and was very nationalistic, he didn't go to war.
Yeah, I know.
Literally. Now, the 26th verse. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. This verse alludes to the Roman generals making their treaties with Ptolemy and Cleopatra, king and queen of Egypt, and afterwards destroying them and making them a Roman province. See the history of Anthony and Octavius Caesar. 27th verse. And both of these kings, Anthony and Octavius, hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, and it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. That this verse is a description of these two Roman rulers is almost left without a doubt. They not only broke their faith with other nations, but with each other and with their wives. And through these two rulers, Rome lost the remainder of her liberties. And under them, the city of Rome ceased to be a republican and the government became imperial.
Yeah, and that's the way that some people interpret the legs, that it's both imperial and republican Rome. Though Miller doesn't accept that view.
No. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Octavius Caesar, after he had conquered Anthony in Egypt, returned to Rome carrying great riches and entered the city in triumph. And by the means of his riches and spoil, he got himself proclaimed emperor of Rome by the name of Augustus Caesar, but was under the reign of his successor, Tiberius Caesar, that the Roman government manifested its hatred against the Holy Covenant by beheading John and crucifying our Savior. "29th verse. And at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former, nor as the latter." This verse seems to carry us down to the end, or appointed time, when pagan Rome was about to be taken away. If this is correct, then he shall return had reference to the northern nations or barbarians who had been, by the power of the Romans, driven into the wilderness of the north, now returning and overrunning the plains of Italy and a part of Africa. This happened at the beginning of the 5th century. So Miller takes this and he gives a very excellent history, but he touches on specific points fairly lightly.
Yeah, and we don't interpret this in the way that he does, this part, verse 29.
So there's a lot to this.
Well, being a study on Daniel chapter 11, yes.
Okay.
But I've never really looked at his study on Daniel chapter 11.
Okay. Well, we'll then continue with this. 30th verse. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have the indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. About AD 447, Attila, called the Scourge of God, ravaged the Roman Empire, and as I conceive, it fulfilled this prophecy, his army being composed of the Huns from Hungary, which was by the ancients called the land of Chittim. Now, I haven't found anything that supports that, but Miller must have seen something.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I quite agree with his interpretation there.
Okay.
The Huns aren't the source of the word hungry. According to T.J. Jones, Hungary came about, I think it was about 800 years AD, well after the Huns.
Mhm.
I think it was from some other word
Mhm.
that Hungary got its name rather than from the Huns, but it was sort of like a similar word, but it wasn't the Huns.
Yeah, it's a false. That's a false etymology.
Yes,
Mhm.
and Uriah Smith relates Chittim, ships of Chittim, to the Vandals rather than to the Huns.
Okay.
They were more of a naval power
Yeah.
based in Carthage, while the Huns were more land based.
Mhm. Yeah, so there are some differences that Miller has with our understanding of this, and some of it, when, you know, it would be based on the information that Miller had at the time. But at the time appointed, so where is Miller putting the time appointed?
I'm wondering if he's not addressing this as an entire period from 158 to 508.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, Smith puts it at 330. Right, so he's taking the time as being 360. So he's going 31 BC plus 330 AD to get the 360.
So 31st verse, an arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. By this I understand the same northern nations that should and did conquer the Roman Empire and polluted Rome by the slaughter of her citizens and ravages committed by the armies of the northern barbarians. And after dividing the Rome into two kingdoms, these two kings being converted to the Christian faith, where the instruments of taking away the pagan rites and sacrifices, which Daniel or the angel denominates the daily sacrifice abomination. Here ends the description of the first beast in the fourth kingdom, which John informs us in Revelation 13:18, he saw numbered, and that his number is 666, which I understand to mean the years that this beast or pagan Rome should contaminate the Jewish and Christian religion, break in pieces and devour with his great iron teeth the same. If this is a correct exposition of the text, then this beast began his power over the people of God 158 years before Christ and would end 508 years after Christ, so that we are brought down to AD 508.
Yeah, so here Miller is taking this two-horn power, not as being the United States.
Right.
He's dealing with it being Rome, another representation of Rome. And so we wouldn't do that. But that's one of his arguments for the 666 years.
Okay.
Because he's going to take counting the number. He saw numbered, and his number is 603 scored 6. So he's going to take that as 666 years.
So my second question here is, would we agree or disagree with this statement presented in the bold above? Is this a correct exposition of the text? And is it applying to Millerite time, or is it applying to our time, or is it applying to both, or neither?
That's a good question. I would think that you can't take Revelation 13 and apply it to Rome. And there's a number of reasons why that we've already shown. So the first one would be, when you look at Revelation 12, we see that this is going to begin with the birth of Christ and God's church, the seed of the woman, ending up fleeing into the wilderness for 1260 years. So Revelation 12, because the crowns are upon the heads, we place this at the time of Christ. In chapter 13 of the beast that comes up out of the sand of the sea, or out of the sea, is at the end of the 1260 years. And it's going to be the rise of the United States. And so we already understand that, because Ellen White interprets that as the beast coming up out of the earth as being the United States. and that its horns represent republicanism and Protestantism. So you couldn't take his argument that the kingdom here referred to is Rome, and that the 666 years then are from 538 to 508. Now, if you're asking whether we could make a double application, I don't think you can. I don't think you can take this and say, well, it applies to both. Because this isn't, this, if just on the face of this prophecy, this 666 is referring to the number of the beast that the United States is going to be promoting, which is the mark of the beast. So Miller has no idea about this, but I still think he's correct in applying the 666 years to Rome, but for a different reason.
Okay. Now, I'm going to jump down just a little bit. The following is a passage. It was presented in 1840. This is from Hines' Signs of the Times, May 15th, 1840. In a very ingenious manner, Miller brings all the mystic numbers in scripture prophecy to bear upon the important epoch of 1843. First, he makes the 2300 days or years of Daniel 8:14 to commence at the same time as the 70 weeks or 490 years, which latter period terminated in the cutting off of the Messiah, 1833. The former period then extends 1,810 years longer, or until 1843, when the end shall come.
Yeah, so that you said 1843 when it was AD, or did you say AD 33?
I said AD 33.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Second, the mystic number of the beast, 666, Revelation 13:18. He applies to pagan Rome. It indicates 666 years, commencing with the league between the Romans and the Jews, BC 158, and terminates when the pagan sacrifices ceased at Rome, AD 508. Now, this is what Hines presented 7 years later.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue going down. The following passage was presented in 1841. The papal power was emphatically a Latin government, so far as language and location are concerned, in a sense in which no other power has been. And it is a name by which they have always been distinguished from the Greeks. The Latins is a well-known name of the Roman Church. I did once think it was pagan Rome. And the number of the beast, the number of years from their first league with the Jews, BC 158, to the conversion of the Ostrogothic king to Christianity, AD 508, but am now satisfied it was an error. The dragon, chapter 12 of Revelation, is the representative of the civil Roman government. That dragon, when the seat of government was removed to Constantinople, gave up his seat to the beast ecclesiastical or anti-Christian Rome. The dragon gave the beast his seat and power and great authority. Imperial Rome made the beast, and Imperial France the image of the beast. Now, this was a public statement of Josiah Litch.
And now, so he's going to put France as the image of the beast, not the
Right.
United States.
Exactly. So among these pioneers, Himes, Litch, Miller, there was a little disagreement over what the representation was to be. But they continued studying.
So you're saying that we look at our history and And we can recognize that there are some things that we didn't fully understand. But we are actually sometimes more right than we think we are, just in the wrong way.
Right.
Because one of the things, when it comes to the 666 years, they look at it later and say, well, I think we were wrong. But I still think Miller was right, but for the wrong reasons. And the reason that I give has to go back to Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. And the two events that are marked there, the siege that happens with Jehoiachin in 597, which is in Leviticus 26, and the siege that happens with Rome in 70 AD. And that's 666 years apart. And so from Ezekiel, we can also show that Ezekiel is marking that period of time. And he's marking the destruction of Jerusalem in two different periods, 586 and in 70 AD. Also being on the 10th day of the 7th month, or 10th day of the 5th month for the destruction of the temple. So since Ezekiel's 666 years ties pagan Rome to Babylon, we would have to assume that the United States, which is the armies of modern Rome, is somehow tied to that. And
Right.
then, so that's the number 666 in Revelation 13. But we would have to look at the connection between pagan and papal Rome as well. So what we end up with is 666 all the way through in different representations.
Exactly.
So sometimes what people do is we make a mistake. And then because we made a mistake or didn't understand something fully, we go and say, well, we were wrong, but we don't realize that there was a reason we had that mistake in the first place, is it was showing us something. So we think we're correcting an error, but often we're going backwards. Because I believe that God is leading this movement, just as he led the Millerites. But often we make the mistake of thinking we made a mistake when we didn't, just
Okay.
because we didn't understand something fully.
Can we agree with Litch's statement as it's presented?
Yeah, because he made a mistake in how they applied Revelation 13.
Okay.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah,
No, he makes a statement about 508 about the Ostrogothic king, so that would be Theodoric.
yeah.
Stephen's
So
correct.
So I think he was in like an Arian king, but probably even before 508.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's the thing, is as we go through this history, when we looked at, the good example is when we looked at how they addressed Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45. Right, going back, I guess to verse 36. And we can see Uriah Smith follows along that train of thought of Litch. But again, there's just things that they missed because they couldn't have understood things fully in their time. And we have the same problem. So what some people have done with the whole issue with Trump is just said, we were completely wrong. Let's go back to the drawing board. But I don't think that we were wrong. I think there's things we didn't understand.
Agreed.
Which is different. That is, as things unfold, we see things more clearly, but we can't abandon the light that led us on, just as the Millerites couldn't with October 22nd, 1844. And some people think that's sort of a type of blind stubbornness. An example of this, what I'm talking about, this sort of blind stubbornness, is route finding in the mountains. So let's say you're going to climb a mountain. You have to find a route up that mountain. Now it's easy nowadays because you got all kinds of satellite images and so forth. But if you're going to climb up a mountain, and you've never climbed up the mountain before. You have to know how to find a route. But sometimes you can get stuck in going the wrong direction. And people, instead of going back, they continue on to their death. And so you have to know when to go back. But you don't go back all the way to the beginning. You just go back to where you stepped off the path, where you got off a bit. And so some people can be stubborn and continue on. And that's what people think we're doing with July 18th and Trump and all these different things. In their view, they think you've gone the wrong way, and you're not humble enough to admit that you were wrong. So that would be the illustration that they would use. And who knows? Maybe they're right. I don't think so in this case, because we know that God has been leading us, and that's a much different thing than being blind. That is, we are blind, but God isn't. And so we're not people doing a route finding, going blind. We're being led by God. And so we know that it may seem that we've got ourselves in a difficulty. But if we were to go back, then we're denying that God was leading us. So it's a much different type of situation than some person just going on their own. God has either led this movement or he hasn't. And so we go back all the way to Millerite history, and we can see that there are times that they thought they were in error, but they were more right than they thought. And I think we have to take that position. And that's not kind of a blind pride or stubbornness. It's just the fact that we believe that God has been leading us.
Okay. Now, the following passage was published in the year 1850. In the 151st year, Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, departed from Rome and came up with a few men unto a city of the seacoast and reigned there. 1 Maccabees 7:1. He places this as BC 162.
Yeah, and that's the 150th year of from, what's the date it's from, 330 or something?
I believe it's from the division of Alexander's kingdom.
So what's the date? I always forget.
Well, if we add 151, that would be 313, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So it must be 313 that they use. I always forget the date they use because I know it's got threes in it.
Okay.
I always think it's 330.
He sent an army to chastise the Jews. Now Judas had heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make a league of amity with all that came unto them. 1 Maccabees 8:1. Such an embassy sent an embassy to Rome to make a league of amity and confederacy with them, and to entreat them that they would take the yoke from them, for they saw that the kingdom of the Grecians did oppress Israel with servitude. Verses 17 and 18. And so did the Romans make a covenant with the people of the Jews. Verse 29.
Yeah,
This-
the Seleucid era starts in 312 BC.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the commencement of the Roman ascendancy over the Jews. In the first month of the 152nd year, the army of Demetrius again encamped before Jerusalem. 1 Maccabees 9:3. And before the return of the ambassadors from Rome in a furious conflict, Judas Maccabeus was slain. Verse 18. BC 161. The death of Judas was followed by a merciless persecution of his adherents, so that there was a great affliction in Israel, like the like whereof was not since the time that a prophet was not seen among them, or since the days of Malachi. In the 153rd year, in the 2nd month, Alchemist the high priest commanded that the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary should be pulled down. And as he began to pull down, he was taken with the palsy and died in great torment. 1 Maccabees 9:54-56, BC 160. Whereupon the land of Judea was in rest for 2 years, BC 158. This is according to Sylvester Bliss, Analysis of Sacred Chronology. So Bliss is giving us evidence for both 161 and 158. One, when the league was sought, and then by 158, as that league looked to become official.
Now I have 159 for the death of Alchemist.
Okay.
So I know he has 160.
The 313 BC date, I think it should be 312.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know. That's why I said 312. I changed it. That's the Seleucid era starts in 312.
Okay, now there are some points that I had looked to get into that have dealt with this from Advent Review and Sabbath Herald and from another article. But we're now within about 15 minutes of close of this presentation, and there's a couple of things I need us to consider.
Okay.
So I'm gonna make a shift here. So you rotate. Now, this again goes back to what Stephen had been presenting, and hopefully we can all see this on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have the 158 BC. We come down to 1863. Seventh-day Adventist Church is established under United States law in 1863. And 158 years later brings us to 2021. Again, 161 BC, 2021 years brings us to 1860, where the Seventh-day Adventist Church name is selected. And 161 years later brings us again to 2021. Addressing this in another way, this is going to be one that's going to be just a little different. And here's part of this where I am very, very grateful, Stephen, to a lot of the work that you've done. Up here, you pointed out, Stephen, that we have a period of 184 years from 158 BC to 27 AD. So we go from the time when this league is official with Rome, where the Jews have sought alliance with Rome, to Christ's baptism. So we have 4 periods of 46 years. Right?
Yep.
Now, one of the few areas where I was having issues with Elder Jeff come to where I'm at the bottom of this page. Because we have these periods of 46 years that we can line out starting in 1863. In 1863, we began to see the effect of giving up the understanding of the 7 times of Leviticus. By 1909, we reached the point where Mrs. White attended her last general conference session. That is a period of 46 years. From 1909 to 1955, we have another period of 46 years. And at this, in this time period, we have the church choosing to accept the teaching of the Trinity, to set aside the understanding of 2300 Arab and Boker evenings and mornings, and seeking an alliance with Protestant churches. The first alliance was with the American government. The second alliance is with the Protestant churches. Now we come to this third period of 46 years that ends in 2001, where the church chooses to accept its alliance in the teaching of spiritual formation, or the acceptance of the Jesuit teachings. So the church has gone into an alliance with Rome. So if we are never to seek an alliance with the nations round about us, are we not seeing that we've already done so, that the government of our church, just like the Jews before, have already chosen to go down this exact path? To me, it's a very sobering thought.
Mhm.
Any comment?
Well, I mean, there's something here that we're not obviously seeing completely.
Okay. Now, here's my problem. Here's my question. What do the symbols of 161 and 158, what do they represent to us?
Well, we have the 15th day of the 8th month and the 16th day of the 1st month.
Any other symbols? What literal symbol can we take from this?
Well, the 161 is connected to the 616. Right, because remember, from July 18th to
Right.
December 25th, 2021 is 161 days. And 616 days from November 9th.
Okay. I'm going to use a different example with you. October 22nd, 1844. Was that the end of the Heavenly Day of Atonement?
October 22nd, 1844 was the beginning of the Day of Atonement.
Okay. So could we then say that 161 BC was the beginning of the league with Rome, and 158 was the confirmation of the league with Rome?
Well, that's the way I take it.
What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I could accept that.
Okay.
But the thing is, there's this other point too, dealing with the 666 years, because that's something that we haven't really studied out or taken into account on how that relates.
Okay.
Now, we're not taking 666 years in our time. We're taking the symbol of 666 representing the Sunday law.
Okay. Now, before I get to my ultimate question, I'm gonna shift back to one part, just for consideration's sake. According to tradition, on April 21st, 753 BC, Romulus and his twin brother Remus founded Rome on the site where they were suckled by a she-wolf as orphaned infants. Actually, the Romulus and Remus myth originated sometime in the 4th century BC, and the exact date of Rome's founding was set by Roman scholar Marcus Tertullius in the 1st century BC. I found it interesting to look at this, that 753 BC Julian to 508 AD Julian gives us a period of 1,260 years.
Okay. That's interesting.
Now, with this point that we were addressing in this chart, we have from 161 and 158 a time period that brings us on a line to the year 2021.
Mhm.
If this is indeed showing us the initiation and the acceptance of the league with Rome, do we have a second witness to confirm this? Because everything we do, we are to do by the testimony of 2 or 3. Shall a matter be established, correct?
Yeah.
So do we have a second witness here?
Well, the 158 and the 161 are sort of 2 different witnesses.
Okay,
And the
I expected you were going
161
to say that.
and 161 and 1860 and 1863.
Well, for our consideration today, I'm going to ask if this doesn't represent a second witness. Help me to understand this, because this worked out in the same way. 158 BC for 2001 years brings us to 1843. In 1843 was the end of the 1335. And if I've understood this correctly from reading Foy's writing, that the 6th trumpet is not yet done sounding at that point. I believe your point, Theodore, was that that 6th trumpet did not finish sounding until October 22nd, 1844, when the 7th trumpet began to sound.
Mhm.
But the 158 brings us also to the year 2001. That 6th trumpet is the second woe, and is also, according to Islam, the second jihad.
Yeah.
The 161 brings us to 1840. And we know that the example there is August 11th, 1840, when Islam fell. Right?
Yeah.
The same 161 years brings us to 2001. We all recognize the validity of September 11, 2001. Islam rose, and they record this as the beginning of the 3rd jihad. My question is, rather than 3 years, if we looked at this as a period of 20 years, from 2001 to 2021, is this not showing us that at this time, we are living at the point where Islam is going to again attack what they see as being the armies of Rome?
Mhm.
We
Yeah,
must,
and an interesting point, just dealing with the 666 years,
right,
from the 26th day of the fourth month in 1299
right,
to the 26th day of the fourth month in 1945, when the bomb is dropped on Hiroshima
right,
on August 6th. That is 666 Islamic years, less 2 months. It's 646 years from 1299 to 1945,
okay,
which is 34 Metonic cycles.
all right,
And if we count 38 Metonic cycles, that's going to bring us to 2021. So if we go from 1299, we go 38 Metonic cycles, it brings us to 2021.
so yet a third witness,
Yeah. So there's a connection between these lines and these dates and these structures that we already have that give us a witness about Islam. We can tie them in with 2001 as well. But we can also tie them in with 2021. So, but what does that mean? Because we're not necessarily predicting an attack by Islam in 2021. But what we did have happen with Islam was basically the problem with Biden pulling out of
Afghanistan,
Afghanistan and the problems that that created. And that was sort of unexpected for most people.
what if Biden wound up leaving even more ordinances there than they want people to understand?
That's possible. I mean, $84 billion worth of equipment, though, is a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's hard to conceive how much money value that is, but, and even whether that's, accurate. Also, we know that the Capitol fell on August 15th.
Okay,
So that gives us that symbol of the midnight cry. So there is something about our history in 2021, as we know, but exactly what it means, we don't particularly know yet. All I'm saying is, I don't think that we can abandon the light that we have. We need to somehow bring this all together to see what it is we've missed.
the point, I guess the point that I was driven to look at,
Yeah.
if 158 and 161 are accepted as being symbols of the league formed with God's people with Rome,
Yeah.
can the year 2001 and 2021 be taken in any different manner?
That there is a league of the church with Rome.
Correct.
Definitely there is in 2001. Now, what's happening in 2021 as far as Adventism is concerned?
Isn't there going to be a meeting with all of the churches and the Pope of Rome?
I'm not sure.
I believe we're going to see something like that coming up here very soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Adventist church has really moved quickly to become woke, at least parts of it.
There was a diagram I'd done based on Theodore's chronology
Yes.
from the birth of Ishmael. And he was born in 1952 BC.
Okay.
And then if you go 21 years, it takes you to 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem.
Wow.
And then if you're just going to use that 1952, then from 70 AD, inclusive reckoning, it'll take you again, 1952 years from 70 AD will take you to 2021, inclusive,
Mhm.
which is just, I was quite tentative with it, but just thought it was interesting.
That brings yet another witness into this whole situation.
Yeah, kind of can slot into this.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's a number of things. I mean, we know that the general conference session was postponed back in 2020, and then it was postponed again. So it was going to be on October 1st and 2nd. And it was going to be overcoming disunity in the body of Christ, concrete steps. I'm not sure what you do with concrete steps, maybe put people's feet in them and put them in a river, but
I didn't know you're that Italian.
not. But they've moved it to June of 2022. And this goes to Colin's idea about the presidents of, Trump being the 45th president and the last president of Adventism being whatever his name is, Ted Wilson.
Right.
And so, I mean, I don't know what that all means necessarily in trying to understand it, but Adventism, is going down such a strange path, and I can't quite understand it. I mean, I do, in a sense, know what's happened, but I mean, with the church dealing with, not supporting its members when it comes to freedom of conscience, that's a huge issue for me.
It's greatly a huge issue.
Yeah. And so I don't, I still think there's lots of things about this pandemic. I mean, obviously, I don't buy into all the conspiracy theories because I think they actually weaken our argument. But the pandemic itself is a type of the Sunday law. And what's happening with the church is a compromise with the state. And it's throwing its members under the bus. And it basically, the church, I don't know how the church can really survive what's been happening. I mean, I don't see how Adventists can continue to support the church. And I don't think that many of them will as they see things moving ahead. I mean, there obviously will be lots supporting it, but there'll be many that won't. But it puts Ted Wilson, postponing it puts Ted Wilson as the conference president a little longer. And I don't know if he'll be elected in again.
Unfortunately, I do know a lot of people that believe that Ted Wilson is a holy man of God.
Yeah, but that's not really the issue. The question is he going to be elected again? One would be his age. He's getting older. I think definitely in 2020 he would have been elected. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, there's lots here to consider. So are we going to, do we have more to look at this next Sunday?
There could be some other items to take a look at next Sunday, yes.
Okay. Okay, well then you can probably close with prayer.
Okay. Loving Father in heaven, We thank you for the many blessings that you have provided. We thank you for this time that we have spent together in this conversation. We ask, Father, that you be with us through the balance of this day. Help us so that that which we do may more properly represent your character to all of those with whom we come in contact. Direct us to this end, Father. For this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.